Grace, and I'm happy to have some interactions with Prof and other colleagues that are here. In July 2022, I found a particular publication at my university library. What attracted me to the publication was the title of the text, Ontological Terror. I was fascinated to know what the author titled that text, Ontological Terror. And when I delve into Calvin Warren's argument, there's a philosophical argument about Black nihilism. The argument and the question he tries to pose in the text captured are the Blacks nothing, the nothingness of the Blacks. And to him, the discrimination, the maltreatment, and the killings, the police brutality he mentioned in the text will never end. That's his argument, that the nothingness of the Blacks, that despite Blacks' involvement in the social, economic, and all the sphere in the United States, though his argument was on African American sphere, but his argument majorly is that the Blacks, till their pursuit to belong, are still being withdrawn in terms of the Black Lives Matters and all that. So I'm kind of rethinking the idea of the argument of Calvin Warren in terms of my my specialty in material histories and architectural history, not by looking his argument about philosophy and philosophizing his text, but kind of looking in the critical question he's asking, are the Blacks nothing, by delving into the archives and reading against the grain of archives. And what I did was to kind of pull out his question, to critically examine the architects, the locations, and how Blacks contributed to not only the spatial transformation of the city, but also involvement in the day-to-day practice of the colonial Nigeria in eastern Nigeria. And what I did was to go to the archives between 1857 to 1949. 1857 significantly is the year the CMS settled or sailed through eastern Nigeria, settled in Onitsha City. And why I'm terminating 1949 was the establishment of the first cathedral church in Onitsha City. So between this period in history, there seems to be a letter correspondence going on between the Missionary Society in Onitsha and that of Henry, the Secretary of CMS in England. So when I'm reading through the grains of the archives, especially the letter writing, I'm thinking of answering and putting forth the questions, answering the questions of are the Blacks nothing, in terms of looking deeply into their contributions to architectural development, social transformation in eastern Nigeria. Next slide. I kind of this paper, no, the previous one. What I did was to start my oral interview as an critical ethnography concerned about the social work, about the people involved in this architectural development in Onitsha City, the architects or the laborers that contributed, in order to give me a sense of belonging, because the CMS histories in Onitsha play little role in telling us the contributions of the Blacks in constructing these buildings, especially the first school in eastern Nigeria, DMGS, the church, the post offices. Why reading through the lines of the church history in Onitsha, there seems to be little or less name mentioned about these Blacks and the argument of Calvin Warren. So my three questions on this research, and also what I want, or what I would expect people to aid me in my writing as I progress in the paper, What stories do building reveal about the urban history of Africa and the concept of nothingness associated with Black identity? The locations of these buildings offer insight into spatial transformation and the existence of Black people. Then I'm now thinking of who is responsible for creating African space and place. And this third question, I'm looking at it between the Foucault's argument and Henry Lavapp's argument about creation of space. Next slide. So just a little bit context on where the city of Onitsha is located. Onitsha is located in present-day eastern Nigeria, but the scope under study, the city is under the old eastern Nigeria. And Nigeria, as we know, has 36 states with our FCT and has its geopolitical zones. And every Nigerian, no matter the religion aspect, is curious about post-civilization. So the next slide. My center argument is on the CMS and the building, the construction, the material histories. People they gathered, especially the Blacks, that constructed some of these buildings. And I started by saying that by the end of slave trade in 1804, the 1857 Niger expedition saw the establishment of CMS in Onitsha, led by the ex-slave Ajayi Crowther. Onitsha became so strategic, majorly because of the River Niger and close to some of the resources within the terrain. I was also in the archives with the letter knife, and I also find out I never knew that beyond Enugu that had lots of coal, that also coal was discovered in Onitsha. It was in the letter writer I was in the archive that also led me to think through why the CMS also settled in Onitsha City. And the CMS needed a place to preach the gospel. And they can't preach the gospel without the influence of the British idea of architecture. In my previous presentation elsewhere, I delved through into looking at the designs of buildings constructed not only in Onitsha but cut across Lokoja, Calabar, rivers to get the letter writing or the question of Crowther asking that we should invest in the visible signs of CMS and religion about Africa. The next slide. So what I did was to compare Calvin Warren's argument about the being and why did it not ontological terror. You will notice that Calvin Warren somehow underlined, he was questioning the Black, if actually he belonged to the society, and by striking the being. So my own as a material historian is to look at some of his argument between the lines, reading through the letter writings in the archives, and also kind of answering the question that Calvin Warren pushed in his work. And one of them I pulled out because of time. He said, one must take a step backward and ask the fundamental question: is the Black, in fact, a human being? And I wouldn't pause by reading all those the letter, but the main thrust of that particular letter is that the third one, I feel that the building project is far too important to permit any form of building to start until all the points are clarified as follows. That the CMS was trying to bring all, even beyond the lease from the king and from other people that owns the land. They has the apparatus to kind of cage everyone to belong to that particular idea about construction. So Warren's argument is that let's question if actually these contributions, these people contributed in building the material histories, why have they not been recognized as human beings? And I'm trying to use this letter to justify that in decolonizing archives, some of the narratives that African laborers contributed not only to the social aspect, but also to the urban history of society. The next slide. The next question I just pulled out from Calvin Warren's argument, that I told the audience, as he was responding to the audience, there was no solution to the problem of anti-blackness. It will continue without end as long as the world exists. That means that if we don't decolonize the archives and bring it to fish out some of these contributions of African development, that till the world ends, that some of these arguments, some of these contributions, some of these spatial transformations that Africa contributed has no meaning. And I'm so excited with the recent publications of Adeyemi Imagine Lagos, where she began to read the maps critically and the contributions of the native in imagining Lagos, the material history, the mapping the place, and also the contribution of the natives in Lagos. And by Friday, we will also look at the author's match critiques. So, and this particular letter, I just kind of balance with this argument that the CMS was trying to cage a particular location in Onitsha where they built hospital and CMS. The post-colonial consequence of this letter, as I'm reading against the grain, is that this particular location up to today has its post-colonial consequences. So the argument of Kavem Waran that this has no end. Of course, in Onitsha today, this particular place has been taken over by the government because it's either belong to the church currently, or the Onitsha indigenes, or the RCM. The land dispute, the Tozo, and some of these things, who owns this particular location. And reading through this letter between the resident CMS and the Secretary CMS in London, you see how they kind of demystify African landscape. The next slide. So my last question is the creating place, society in Onitsha. And I began to look at Foucault's argument of other spaces, that the space in which we live, where we live in Africa, which draws us out of ourselves, in which the erosion of our lives, our time and our history occurs, the space that crawls and grows at us is also in itself a heterogeneous space. That means it's a place and a space that was just carved out to achieve a particular purpose. And I just placed the letter side by side, reading through the letter to also discuss further how CMS contributed to the creation of Muslim Christian Tozo in Onitsha, where they kind of break what I titled a city with walls, where you see there's a particular place Muslims are located in Onitsha, and there's a particular place the Christians are located. So that means that whenever there is a Tozo in Onitsha city, you know where to get the Muslims and where to get the Christians. So it seems that the CMS also contributed to this heterogeneous space, not only in Onitsha but also in other places in West Africa. The last, okay, yeah, my last slide. So I'm kind of rethinking the question of Kavem Waran, are the blacks nothing? By looking critically to the letters and personal feelings that created space, just like Samuel Ajayi Crowther created space in Onitsha city with his letters trying to call the Muslims some names. Until today, we have post-colonial consequences of those letter writings that Ajayi Crowther tries to create a kind of boundary between maybe his personal feelings from his slave encounters, but that post-colonial consequences of creating Christian and Muslim space also generated a transitional trauma. And beyond colonial sphere, as Kavem Waran is looking at post-colonial argument and police brutality in the US, I'm also aligning my thoughts with Kavem Waran's that post-colonial African leaders and the northern of Black continent should also be looking in terms of our political sphere. And in politics, Africa has not really gotten to the peak, and that's why he goes back and forth to argue that Africa really has a problem in terms of then belong to society. And I'm thinking that Kavem Waran's argument that Africa is yet to get there is based on our political sphere. And I'm calling on us to kind of look more on archival decolonization to give some sphere about this question. Thank you so much.